November 8, 1942. The waters off Guadalcanal shimmer under a moonless sky, the darkness so complete that sailors aboard the Japanese cruiser squadron strain their eyes toward the horizon, searching for any sign of the American vessels they know must be nearby. Vice Admiral Hiroaki Abe stands on the bridge of the battleship Hiei, confident that his force of 2 battleships, 1 cruiser, and 14 destroyers will locate and eliminate the enemy before dawn. His crews have trained for years in night combat, perfecting the art of visual detection and rapid torpedo strikes that have made the Imperial Japanese Navy legendary throughout the Pacific. What they cannot see, however, is the invisible net already tracking their every movement from ships miles away, a technological advantage so profound that it will render decades of tactical training obsolete in a single night. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the story of how a secret technology transformed naval combat forever, turning Japan's most confident admirals into bewildered witnesses of their own fleet's systematic dismantling, and how the psychological impact of fighting an enemy who could see through darkness itself would prove more devastating than any conventional weapon. Commander Tamichi Hara of the destroyer Amatsukaze had participated in nearly every major naval engagement since the conflict's beginning. His diary entry from October 19, 1942, reveals the supreme confidence permeating the Japanese Naval Officer Corps. He wrote that American ships seemed to stumble through night engagements like blind men in an unfamiliar room, their searchlights sweeping uselessly across empty ocean, while Japanese vessels maneuvered unseen and struck with devastating precision. The Imperial Navy's doctrine emphasized night attacks specifically because their crews excelled at it. Officers spent hours in darkened rooms before night operations, allowing their eyes to fully adjust. Lookouts were selected for exceptional vision and trained to detect the faintest contrast against the night sky. Fire control teams could estimate range and bearing with remarkable accuracy, using only visual observation and intuition born from endless practice. The statistics supported their confidence. In the months following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces had achieved an extraordinary series of victories. At the encounter off Savo Island in August 1942, Japanese cruisers had approached an Allied force and achieved complete surprise, sinking 4 heavy cruisers while suffering only minor damage to a single ship. The Allied casualties exceeded 1,000 sailors, while Japanese losses numbered fewer than 100. Similar patterns had emerged across multiple engagements. Japanese torpedoes, particularly the Type 93 known as Long Lance, could travel 24,000 meters at 48 knots, far exceeding anything in the American arsenal. In night actions, where visual detection determined success, these superior weapons seemed invincible. Lieutenant Masatake Okumiya, an intelligence officer stationed at Rabaul, maintained detailed records of naval engagements. His reports noted that American ships appeared to have no effective means of locating enemy vessels in darkness beyond visual observation. When American searchlights illuminated Japanese ships, it typically meant the Americans had already suffered hits from torpedoes launched from invisible attackers. The pattern seemed consistent. Japanese forces detected enemy vessels first, maneuvered into advantageous positions, and struck before the Americans realized what was happening. Okumiya's confidence is evident in a report dated September 22, 1942, where he predicted that American naval forces would require years to develop the night fighting skills Japanese crews already possessed. Captain Toshikazu Omae served on the staff of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto and participated in strategic planning discussions throughout 1942. Years later, he recalled the prevailing attitude among senior Japanese naval officers during this period. They believed, he said, that American industrial capacity might eventually produce overwhelming numbers of ships and aircraft, but that superior Japanese training and doctrine would continue to deliver tactical victories. The notion that technology might eliminate the advantages gained through training and experience simply did not factor into their calculations. Naval combat remained, in their conception, primarily a contest of skill, courage, and tactical acumen rather than a technological competition. This worldview began to crack during the naval encounter off Guadalcanal on that November night. The American task force under Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan consisted of 13 ships, including 5 cruisers and 8 destroyers, facing Abe's larger and more heavily armed squadron. By every conventional measure, Japanese forces held the advantage. Their battleships outgunned the American cruisers massively, and their superior night-fighting skills should have ensured victory. Yet something had fundamentally changed in the tactical equation, though Japanese commanders would not immediately understand what. At 24 minutes past 1 in the morning, lookouts aboard the American destroyer, Fletcher detected the Japanese force at a distance of 4,500 meters. This might seem unremarkable, except for one crucial detail. Visibility conditions were extremely poor, with heavy cloud cover blocking even starlight. The detection occurred not through human eyesight, but through a device called SG Surface Search Radar, a compact unit small enough to mount on destroyers, yet capable of detecting ships beyond visual range in any weather or lighting condition. Information from Fletcher's radar plot reached Admiral Callahan within seconds, providing exact range, bearing, and course of the approaching Japanese vessels. Commander Frederick Moosbrugger, gunnery officer aboard the cruiser San Francisco, later described the bizarre quality of the engagement's opening phase. His fire control team received targeting information for Japanese vessels they could not see. Range and bearing data appeared precise and steady, updating every few seconds. Yet when Moosbrugger looked through his binoculars toward the indicated positions, he saw only darkness. It contradicted every instinct developed through years of naval training, requiring his crews to fire at coordinates provided by an invisible observer rather than at targets they could visually confirm. The psychological difficulty of this cannot be overstated. Naval gunners had always relied on seeing their targets, adjusting fire based on observed splashes and hits. Now they were being asked to trust electronic information displayed on a circular screen, firing into apparent emptiness and hoping that invisible accuracy translated into real-world impacts. The American vessels opened fire at 1,800 meters, their shells finding targets with shocking precision despite the darkness. Aboard the Hiei, Vice Admiral Abe experienced profound confusion. Searchlights from American ships suddenly illuminated his flagship, immediately followed by salvos from multiple directions. The coordination seemed impossible. How had the Americans achieved such precise positioning in complete darkness? How had they located his force so quickly and maneuvered into advantageous attack positions without being detected? Japanese lookouts, considered the finest in the world, had seen nothing until American searchlights blazed to life. Even more troubling, after the searchlights extinguished, American guns continued firing with undiminished accuracy, suggesting the lights served merely to mark targets visually rather than being necessary for detection. The encounter devolved into chaos, with ships from both sides firing at point-blank range in a confused melee. Both forces suffered significant casualties. The Americans lost 2 cruisers and 4 destroyers, while Japanese forces lost 2 destroyers with the Hiei so badly damaged that she would be scuttled the following day. Yet despite the tactical draw, the engagement represented a strategic earthquake. For the first time, American forces had not only matched, but potentially exceeded Japanese capabilities in night combat, previously considered an exclusively Japanese domain. Commander Hara, wounded during a subsequent engagement 2 days later, spent his recovery period analyzing what had occurred. His superiors assured him that the American success resulted from luck and aggression rather than any technological advantage. Yet Hara's analytical mind rejected this comfortable explanation. The pattern of American gunnery suggested systematic detection capability rather than fortunate visual sightings. American ships had maneuvered with confidence in absolute darkness, maintaining formation and executing coordinated tactics that should have been impossible without the ability to see friendly and enemy vessels simultaneously. Something had changed, and Hara suspected the Americans possessed detection equipment superior to Japanese technology. His suspicions proved correct, though the full extent of American radar development would not become clear to Japanese commanders for months. The United States had invested enormous resources into radar technology, recognizing its potential to revolutionize naval combat. By late 1942, American ships routinely carried multiple radar systems. Air search radars for detecting aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 kilometers, surface search radars capable of locating ships beyond visual range, and fire control radars that could track targets and direct gunfire with mechanical precision. These systems represented one of the conflict's best-kept secrets, their existence known only to personnel with the highest security clearances. Lieutenant Robert Copeland, serving aboard the destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts, later described his first experience with radar as almost supernatural. During a training exercise in early 1943, his ship approached another American vessel in thick fog, visibility reduced to fewer than 100 meters. On the radar screen, Copeland watched the other ship's position update every few seconds, the display showing exact range and bearing with crystalline clarity. His ship maneuvered to a parallel course, maintaining precise spacing despite being unable to see the other vessel. When the fog lifted an hour later, Copeland looked across and saw the other ship exactly where the radar had indicated, following a perfectly parallel course at the exact separation distance the screen had shown. The technology made the invisible visible, transforming night and fog from tactical challenges into irrelevant inconveniences. The strategic implications extended far beyond individual engagements. Captain Ellis Zacharias, assigned to Naval Intelligence, prepared a detailed analysis of radar's impact for senior American commanders. His report, dated January 15, 1943, outlined how radar fundamentally altered naval combat's geometry. Traditional tactics assumed that both sides operated under similar sensory limitations, that darkness and weather affected all combatants equally. Radar shattered this assumption, creating asymmetric conditions where one side could see while the other remained blind. Zacharias predicted that as radar systems improved and proliferated throughout the fleet, Japanese forces would face increasingly unfavorable tactical situations, regardless of their skill or courage. Japanese naval intelligence gradually pieced together evidence of American radar capabilities, though the full picture emerged slowly. After the encounter at Guadalcanal, American prisoners were questioned extensively about detection methods. Some prisoners, unaware of radar's classified nature, mentioned electronic equipment used for navigation and target location. Japanese technical officers examined wreckage from destroyed American ships, recovering damaged equipment they could not fully comprehend. The components suggested high-frequency radio transmission and reception, but Japanese engineers struggled to understand how such systems could provide accurate targeting information. Lieutenant Commander Yokoi Toshiyuki, a Japanese radar development officer, later wrote about the frustration of recognizing American technological superiority while lacking resources to respond effectively. Japanese researchers had developed radar prototypes as early as 1936, actually ahead of American efforts. However, Japan's limited industrial capacity and skepticism among senior naval officers resulted in minimal investment in radar development. While American factories churned out thousands of increasingly sophisticated radar units, Japanese production remained limited to experimental systems with mediocre performance. By 1943, the gap had become unbridgeable. American ships routinely carried radar equipment Japanese scientists could barely imagine constructing, let alone mass-producing. The naval encounter off Cape St. George on November 25, 1943, demonstrated the evolved tactical reality. Captain Ali Burke commanded a destroyer squadron assigned to intercept Japanese vessels attempting to reinforce garrisons in the Solomon Islands. Burke's ships detected the Japanese force on radar at a range of 10 kilometers, tracking the enemy vessels while remaining undetected themselves. Using radar-derived position information, Burke maneuvered his destroyers into an ideal ambush position, approaching from an angle that minimized Japanese lookouts' chance of visual detection while maximizing his own torpedo firing solutions. The engagement lasted barely 30 minutes. American destroyers launched torpedoes based entirely on radar targeting data, with crews firing at contacts visible only as glowing marks on circular displays. Multiple torpedoes struck Japanese destroyers, resulting in catastrophic damage. Japanese vessels, detecting the attack only when torpedoes exploded against their hulls, attempted to maneuver and return fire, but they were shooting at phantoms. American ships, informed of their exact position relative to Japanese forces through continuous radar tracking, maintained optimal distance and angle throughout the engagement. When Japanese vessels turned to pursue, American ships accelerated away, monitoring their pursuers on radar and adjusting course to maintain safe separation. The Japanese force lost 3 destroyers without inflicting any damage on American ships. Commander Kiyoshi Sugihara survived the encounter and spent years after the conflict analyzing what had occurred. His post-war writings reveal a man struggling to comprehend a fundamentally unfair tactical situation. He described the helplessness of fighting an enemy who knew his exact position while remaining invisible himself. Japanese crews performed every task flawlessly, yet still found themselves at absolute disadvantage. Lookouts strained their exceptional vision against darkness. Gunners stood ready to engage targets the moment they appeared. Torpedo crews prepared to launch their superior weapons. None of it mattered. The Americans detected them first, maneuvered into advantageous positions unseen, and struck before Japanese forces could respond. Superior training and equipment meant nothing against an enemy who possessed what seemed almost like precognition. The psychological impact on Japanese naval personnel cannot be overstated. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, commander of the 1st Battleship Division, wrote extensively in his diary about the changing nature of naval combat. His entry from December 3, 1943, expresses bewilderment and frustration. He noted that American forces seemed to possess supernatural awareness of Japanese movements, consistently achieving surprise despite Japanese efforts at stealth and deception. Ugaki recognized that some form of advanced technology must explain American success, but felt helpless to counter it. He compared the situation to fighting an opponent who can see in daylight while you stumble through darkness, an apt metaphor for radar's tactical revolution. American production capacity amplified radar's impact. By mid-1943, virtually every American warship larger than a patrol boat carried at least basic radar equipment. Many vessels carried multiple systems, providing complementary capabilities. The escort carrier Guadalcanal, for instance, mounted 6 different radar antennas serving distinct functions: long-range air search, short-range air warning, surface search, navigation, and 2 fire control systems for primary and secondary batteries. Radar operators became specialists, trained to interpret the display's nuances and extract maximum information from electronic returns. Schools were established specifically to train radar technicians, with thousands of sailors cycling through programs teaching radar theory, maintenance, and tactical employment. Japanese efforts to develop countermeasures proved largely ineffective. Some vessels received basic radar detectors capable of warning when enemy radar signals illuminated them, but these devices provided only general alerts without specific information about enemy locations or intentions. Other experiments included radar-absorbent coatings applied to ship hulls and superstructures, attempting to reduce radar reflection and make vessels harder to detect. These measures achieved marginal results at best. American radar systems operated at multiple frequencies, making comprehensive absorption impossible with available materials. Even modest reduction in radar signature meant little when American detection ranges exceeded visual distances by such dramatic margins. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 showcased radar's dominance in carrier operations. American carriers used radar to vector fighters toward incoming Japanese aircraft while still hundreds of kilometers distant, allowing interception long before enemy planes threatened the fleet. Japanese pilots, expecting to approach undetected until within visual range, instead found themselves engaged by American fighters, guided to precise intercept positions through electronic surveillance. The result was slaughter. American pilots, directed to optimal attack positions and forewarned of enemy numbers and altitude, shot down more than 300 Japanese aircraft over 2 days, while losing fewer than 30 of their own. Pilots called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a darkly humorous reference to the one-sided nature of the engagement. Commander Takahashi Chihaya, a staff officer who survived the conflict, later wrote about the despair spreading through the Japanese Naval Command during 1944. Officers who had spent entire careers mastering naval tactics now found their expertise irrelevant. Ships that had been formidable instruments of war became vulnerable targets the moment they encountered American forces equipped with comprehensive radar. The Japanese Navy's doctrine, developed over decades and proven in early engagements, had been rendered obsolete by a technology Japanese industry could not replicate in sufficient quantity or quality. Takahashi described feeling like a samurai warrior facing machine guns, his years of training and skill meaningless against an opponent employing fundamentally different methods. American naval officers recognized their advantage and exploited it ruthlessly. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton, commanding the destroyer Laffey, described using radar as a tactical weapon even beyond its detection capabilities. During engagements, he would maneuver his ship erratically, knowing that Japanese gunners relying on visual tracking would struggle to predict his position. Meanwhile, his radar maintained perfect awareness of enemy locations regardless of his own ship's movements, allowing his guns to fire accurately even during radical maneuvers. This inverted the traditional relationship between maneuver and gunnery, where aggressive maneuvering typically degraded shooting accuracy. With radar fire control, American ships could dodge and shoot simultaneously, a capability Japanese vessels could not match. The surface action off Surigao Strait on October 25, 1944 represented perhaps the ultimate demonstration of radar-directed naval combat. Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf positioned his force across the narrow strait, with battleships forming a line perpendicular to the approaching Japanese force. American destroyers using radar tracked the Japanese vessels as they transited the confined waters, launching torpedo attacks from positions Japanese lookouts could not detect. The Japanese force, consisting of 2 battleships and 4 destroyers, proceeded forward, unaware of the trap closing around them. American battleships, many of them survivors from Pearl Harbor, opened fire at ranges exceeding 20,000 meters, their radar fire control systems providing targeting accuracy impossible through visual observation alone. Rear Admiral Shoji Nishimura, commanding the Japanese force, found himself in an incomprehensible tactical situation. Shells fell around his ships from invisible sources, with American gunfire demonstrating accuracy that suggested close-range observation despite darkness preventing visual contact. His flagship, the battleship Yamashiro, absorbed dozens of hits before capsizing, taking Nishimura down with her. The entire engagement lasted less than an hour, with American forces essentially annihilating the Japanese column while suffering minimal damage themselves. Survivors described the nightmarish quality of the encounter, fighting an enemy they could not see, while being systematically torn apart by precisely directed fire from multiple directions. Lieutenant Shigeru Nishino, one of the few survivors from the destroyer Shigure, spent decades trying to make sense of what happened that night. His account, recorded in 1986, reveals a man still haunted by the experience. He described the terror of being under accurate fire from sources he could not locate, the helplessness of watching his ship and companions destroyed by an enemy that seemed omniscient. Nishino specifically mentioned that Japanese forces performed their duties flawlessly, that there was no failure of courage or competence among his comrades. They simply faced an opponent operating under fundamentally different rules, an opponent who could see through darkness as if it were daylight while Japanese forces remained blind. The technological gap extended beyond radar itself into the broader systems required to exploit radar data effectively. American ships featured combat information centers where radar operators, plotters, and command staff worked together in coordinated teams. Information from multiple radar systems was integrated, creating comprehensive tactical pictures showing all detected contacts, friendly and enemy, updating continuously. Fire control computers translated radar data into gunnery solutions, automatically calculating the complex ballistics required to hit moving targets at extreme ranges. These systems represented enormous investment in not just hardware, but also training, doctrine development, and organizational evolution. Japanese efforts to develop comparable integrated systems founded on multiple obstacles. Limited industrial capacity meant that even producing sufficient basic radar units proved impossible, let alone developing sophisticated fire control computers and information management systems. Cultural factors also played a role. Japanese naval tradition emphasized individual ship captains' autonomy and aggressive action, an approach that worked well when all combatants operated under similar sensory limitations, but became liability when facing enemy forces coordinated through comprehensive electronic surveillance. Attempts to implement more centralized command structures ran counter to deeply ingrained organizational culture and achieved limited success. By 1945, the disparity had become absolute. American ships could detect, track, and engage enemy vessels under virtually any conditions, day or night, in clear weather or storms, at ranges where visual observation remained impossible. Japanese forces, lacking equivalent capabilities, found themselves fighting at perpetual disadvantage. Even when Japanese ships carried basic radar equipment, the system's limited range and reliability meant they provided marginal tactical benefit. American radar operators could detect Japanese ships long before Japanese systems picked up American vessels, maintaining the asymmetric advantage throughout the conflict's final year. The human cost of this technological disparity is difficult to quantify precisely, but undoubtedly substantial. How many Japanese sailors died because their lookouts could not see American ships already tracking them on radar? How many vessels were lost to torpedo attacks launched from positions Japanese crews never detected? The questions are impossible to answer definitively, but the pattern is clear. In naval engagements where American forces employed comprehensive radar and Japanese forces did not, American victories came with remarkable consistency and usually at favorable casualty ratios. Captain Atsushi Oi, a Japanese destroyer commander who survived the conflict, later worked with American naval historians documenting Pacific War operations. His unique perspective, having commanded ships in combat against radar-equipped American forces and subsequently studied American tactics and technology, provided valuable insights. Oi concluded that radar represented perhaps the single most decisive technological advantage of the Pacific naval conflict, more significant than any individual weapon system or platform. The ability to see enemy forces while remaining undetected yourself, he noted, invalidated virtually every traditional naval tactic and doctrine. Japanese forces essentially fought the conflict's second half under conditions of permanent and unshakable disadvantage, a situation from which no amount of skill or courage could compensate. The experience transformed American naval thinking as profoundly as it devastated Japanese confidence. Young American officers who grew up professionally in an environment where radar was standard equipment developed tactical approaches fundamentally different from those taught to pre-conflict naval officers. They thought in terms of electronic detection ranges rather than visual horizons, considered radar cross-sections rather than visual silhouettes, and employed tactics that assumed comprehensive awareness of the battle space rather than limited sensory perspective. This represented not just tactical evolution, but cognitive revolution, a fundamental shift in how naval combat was conceptualized and executed. Rear Admiral Arleigh Burke, whose career spanned from pre-conflict destroyers through post-conflict nuclear submarines, exemplified this transformation. In his memoir, Burke describes the mental adjustment required to fully embrace radar-centric tactics. Early in the conflict, he still thought primarily in visual terms, using radar as a supplementary tool to enhance traditional methods. By 1944, however, radar had become his primary tactical sense, with visual observation serving merely to confirm what electronics had already revealed. This inversion required abandoning decades of trained instinct and trusting technology over human perception, a psychological shift that some older officers never fully achieved. For Japanese commanders, no such adaptation was possible. They recognized radar's importance, but lacked the industrial and technical capacity to deploy it effectively. Admiral Soimu Toyoda, who commanded Japanese naval forces during the conflict's final year, later acknowledged that the technological gap had become insurmountable long before hostilities ended. His forces fought bravely, and occasionally achieved tactical successes. But the systematic advantages enjoyed by American forces meant that strategic victory had become impossible. Toyota specifically identified radar as the critical capability that Japanese forces could neither match nor effectively counter, a gap that determined outcomes more reliably than numerical strength or tactical skill. The legacy of radar's impact extended far beyond the conflict itself. Post-conflict naval development centered on electronic systems with enormous resources devoted to improving detection, tracking, and fire control capabilities. The arms race between detection and stealth, between seeing and hiding, became central to naval competition throughout the Cold War and beyond. Every major navy invested heavily in radar technology and electronic warfare, recognizing that dominance in the electromagnetic spectrum often determined victory or defeat, more reliably than traditional measures of combat power. For survivors of those night engagements in the Pacific, the memory of fighting against an enemy who seemed to possess supernatural awareness remained vivid decades later. They spoke of the frustration and fear of being engaged by invisible opponents, the helplessness of superior training and equipment rendered meaningless by technological disparity. Their accounts provide sobering reminder that in warfare, seeing the enemy before he sees you often matters more than courage, skill, or even superior weapons. Radar gave American forces that advantage consistently and decisively, transforming the tactical geometry of naval combat in ways that determined outcomes throughout the Pacific theater. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Do not forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.